Running is not about escaping anyone, but about returning to oneself. That phrase lies somewhere within the pages of Born to Run, the book that made the world re-examine the relationship between humans and their own bodies. It begins with a seemingly simple question: why are modern humans so fragile? While there are tribes so poor they don't even have shoes, yet can run hundreds of kilometers without tiring. Christopher McDougall's Born to Run isn't about sports in the conventional sense. It's an anthropological investigation and a spiritual journey through Mexico's rugged Sierra Madre Mountains, where the Tarahumara people live in isolation from the world. There, a secret exists, one that industrial civilization has forgotten. Humans are born to run, not to compete, but to live. They run with joy, in solitude, through sun and dust, as if each step is a silent prayer. The book opens not just with biological truths, but with questions that delve deep into the nature of existence. If our ancestors relied on endurance to survive, why have modern humans, with all their medicine, shoes, and technology, lost that ability? Has progress made our bodies weak and our spirits weary? McDougall sought answers not in laboratories, but with his own ragged feet among rocky slopes, where breath mingled with the wind and heartbeats with the earth. Born to Run is a story of endurance, but more profoundly, it's a story of faith, of how humans rediscover the meaning of freedom when forced to confront their own limits. Of running not to win, but to understand that sometimes happiness isn't at the finish line, but in the rhythm of the feet moving forward. In Mexico's red dust desert, amidst the rugged Sierra Madre, I embarked on a journey that felt like it only existed in legend. They spoke of a shadowy figure living hidden there, known as Caballo Blanco, the white horse, a tireless runner, a phantom in real life. I searched for him in an old, weathered hotel in a parched town, where wind whistled through broken window frames, and people said he returned every evening like a ritual. I waited for him amidst the heat, confusion, and exhaustion, unsure if I was looking for a person or something else lost within my own life. The hunt for Caballo Blanco led me into a land where maps became useless. There, the Tarahumara people lived as if they didn't belong to this world. They ran all day long on steep cliff faces, light as the wind, needing no shoes, no technology, no praise. Some said they could chase deer until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Others claimed they knew no anger, no deceit. And when tired, they drank a cloudy liquid, a secret passed down through generations to keep their feet strong as rock. Everything there contradicted what I had always believed. They ate little yet were strong, poor yet peaceful, spoke little yet understood deeply. I began my journey seeking answers for a pain in my foot, but the further I went, the more that pain transformed into a different question. Why do humans weaken when they believe they're becoming stronger? Doctors told me my body wasn't made for running, but among the Tarahumara, I saw the opposite. They were born to run, not for achievement, not for pressure, but because it was the very breath of life. And we, modern humans, need expensive shoes, machines, someone to track every step, and still we can't avoid injury. The more modern we become, the more fragile we are. I delved deeper and saw this paradox clearly in our own history. Humans were once pursuit predators, a species evolved to run endlessly, to survive in thirsty deserts and hot jungles. But when we created comfort, those primal runs vanished, replaced by tired feet in shoes, bodies twisted out of sync with nature. We no longer run to live, but live to rediscover the feeling of running. I left the city, crossing sandy trails and the shadows of cacti, venturing deep into a world where humans dissolved into rock and wind. Each step felt like entering a different time, where there were no clocks, no news, no fear. When night fell, the sky draped millions of stars over me, and in that silence, I heard my heartbeat, merging with the distant echo of invisible footsteps. I began to understand that Caballo Blanco was not just a person, but a symbol of the yearning for freedom. I met Ano, considered the fastest in his tribe. He was quiet, with bright eyes, sun-darkened skin, and legs as sturdy as oak trunks. He lived in a small adobe house in a narrow valley where the river cut through rock like a wound. He didn't speak much, only offered me some forest fruits and invited me to sit. In that moment, I understood their greatness lay not in speed, but in their attitude towards life. They ran not to defeat anyone, but to keep their souls from decay. Ano looked at me as he would a stranger from a world of smoke and steel. I asked him about the races, why they could run hundreds of kilometers without tiring. He just smiled, his gaze drifting towards the river, where the sunlight shimmered. For them, there was nothing to explain. They needed no philosophy. They simply did what their bodies and hearts understood best. There, I saw something modern humans had lost, the unity of body and mind. On that journey, I met people like Caballo, those who left the urban world to find life in solitude. He was once a boxer, once famous, then abandoned everything, taking only his worn sandals and ran. He said running helped him find himself again, and the Tarahumara taught him to run like breathing. They didn't need training, they simply lived in motion. They taught him not to fear hunger, not to fear fatigue, not to fear loneliness. They taught that true freedom begins when humans no longer depend on anything but their own 2 feet. I remember him talking about days wandering over mountains, with no destination, no idea where he would stop, just running because he loved it. He laughed loudly, saying that was the most beautiful thing, running without a reason. I realized that perhaps what made the Tarahumara immortal was not their endurance, but the primal joy in every stride. They laughed when they ran, sang when they ran, and when they fell with laughter in the desert. I saw Tarahumara children kicking a wooden ball down dusty roads, playing and running all day long. No one counted time, no one grew tired. Beside them, silver-haired elders walked steadily up the mountain slopes. No one thought of it as sport. For them, it was a way of life. Running was how they connected with the sky and earth, with each other, and with the sacred thing we call happiness. As I left the valley, I carried a new question. In a world where humans are constantly chasing everything, have we forgotten the one thing that truly makes us feel alive? The sensation of freedom when our feet touch the earth, when our heartbeat harmonizes with the wind's rhythm. I went looking for Caballo, but ultimately I realized I was looking for the part of myself that had fallen asleep within me, a part that only awakens when I run, at the end of a dusty path amidst vast mountains and mist. I saw Caballo vanish into the pale light of dawn. He didn't look back. He didn't need a goodbye. I understood because he was never there to stay. He just ran, and in his stride, I heard the simplest, most profound reminder a human could ever give themselves. Run, because we were born to do it. I continued following Caballo's footsteps deeper into the Sierra Madre, where mountains and rivers cut across like ancient gashes. The trails were barely wide enough for one person, winding between cliffs and thorny bushes. I carried a water bottle, dried corn, and a curiosity like an unextinguished flame. In this place, every step was a choice between life and death. But for the Tarahumara, it was an everyday game. Their lives were continuous movement, and in that movement, they found pure joy. Ano told me about the canyon races, where they ran from dawn till late at night just to laugh together and drink potent corn beer. They had no trophies, no medals, no scoreboards. At the finish line, the winner would share food with the loser. Then they would all dance until morning. I looked at them, their bodies tanned and hard as rock, and realized they didn't understand the meaning of defeat. Because when you run with joy, no one can make you lose. I asked Caballo why he lived in this land. He simply shrugged and said the world outside tired him, the petty human conflicts, the walls of comparison, the lost gazes in the city. He said here, everything was simplified to its core. He had enough food not to be hungry, enough paths to run, enough sky to breathe. He smiled when he said he needed nothing more. He chose poverty for freedom. He chose solitude to listen to life. As I sat by the fire with them, the stories of the Tarahumara became a steady drumbeat in the night. They spoke of ancestors, of endless deer hunts. Some said that if you ran long enough, the deer's spirit would merge with the hunter, making them one. Hearing that, I felt I understood a part of their mystery. They ran not just with muscles, but with heart. They hunted not to kill, but to connect. And in that connection, they found what we, the civilized, have lost. Caballo led me to meet his friends, eccentrics from all over who came to Copper Canyon. Some were famous athletes, some were wanderers, but once there, all became humble students at the feet of the Tarahumara. They learned to listen to their footsteps, to let pain become not an enemy but a guide. One of them said that only by pushing past the threshold of exhaustion does one truly begin to live. The body is a door, and pain is the key that unlocks the deepest part of oneself. I remember one early morning when the sun first pierced the cliffs, Caballo told me to take off my shoes and run. The earth was cold, the rocks sharp, the wind bit at my face. I fell, got up, and fell again. He didn't help, just smiled and said, "Don't think, just run." I ran, each step heavy, each breath scorching, but amidst the fatigue something suddenly shifted. I no longer thought about the destination, no longer thought about the pain, everything became light. I felt myself dissolving into the earth and wind. In that moment, I understood why they could run all day and still smile. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Caballo spoke of a race he was preparing to organize, an unprecedented race. The best long-distance runners from America would come to Mexico to test themselves against the Tarahumara. He spoke with eyes shining like a child's. We will show the world that there is still another way to live, not with money, not with fame, but with courage and joy. I looked at him and understood this was not just a race, but a declaration against humanity's forgetfulness. In the following days, I met more unusual people, Jen and Billy, two wild youngsters with bare feet and carefree smiles. They lived like fire, like wind, fearing nothing. They said running helped them escape the feeling of being confined in an overly narrow society. For them, every trail was a song, every scrape a testament to real life. And then there was Scott, the legendary athlete who had won the world's most brutal ultramarathons. He came here not for glory, but to find what made him start, the primal love for every stride. Different people, but all drawn to a common point, the call of freedom. Caballo gathered them like pieces of a grand mosaic. He said the Tarahumara were not just runners, they were symbols of harmony between humans and nature. The race he was preparing would have no spectators, no cameras, no prizes, only mountains, wind, and heartbeats. He wanted everyone to remember what humanity once knew. That running is not to prove, but to truly exist. The last night before the race began, I sat on the porch, listening to the stream and the wind sighing through the cliffs in the darkness. I felt the breath of this land, slow, deep, and all-encompassing. In what seemed like the most desolate place, I found humanity closest to truth. I understood that what I was seeking wasn't in doctors' answers or sports articles, but in my own feet. There, in every sinew, every breath, humans still carried the legacy of their ancestors. We are born to move, to endure, to live with a primal joy that no machine can replace. The next morning, as dawn swept across the cliffs, the air in the valley was thick like the breath of a giant awakening. I knew that day would not just be a race, but a sacred ritual. Caballo stood before the people he had gathered, Tarahumara and Huarachis and American outsiders with scarred feet and curious eyes. He offered no cheers, no shouts, he simply nodded, gestured, and they all began to run. There was no gun, no starting line, only the absolute stillness of nature. The path wound through rocky mountains and dry rivers, where the air was so thin each breath felt like a knife in the throat. Scott led with long, decisive strides. Anno clung close behind, his face calm as if he were taking a stroll. Jen and Billy ran together, laughing loudly amidst the dust. Barefoot Ted was as naked to the ground as a child playing in the dirt. I ran behind them, watching, and saw something strange. In that moment, no one was a guest, no one a host. All were equal before the path. The race transformed into an invisible language, each step a statement, each breath a dialogue with the mountains and forest. No one competed, yet everyone gave their all. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became brutal, but the Tarahumara still ran light as feathers. Their feet glided over rocks without leaving a trace. I saw Anno smile faintly as he passed Scott, no pride in it, just the smile of one who understood this was what he was born to do. They didn't win, they simply returned to their true nature. I vividly remember the moment Scott fell, sand sticking to his sweat, blood seeping into the earth, but he didn't stop. He limped up and kept running. Anno turned back, waiting a few steps, an unspoken invitation. In that race, the winner wasn't the one who finished first, but the one who knew why they ran. As they both crossed the final stretch, I saw Caballo smile. His eyes shimmered in the sun, as if he had waited a lifetime for this moment. When night fell, the race ended. No cheers, no flashing lights, only flickering firelight and the smell of roasting corn drifting on the wind. The Tarahumara sang their songs, simple yet spreading like a breeze through every soul. Sitting beside Anna, we shared a cup of corned beer without needing words. We understood each other. There were no Americans, no Mexicans, no winners or losers, only people, feet, and a nameless joy. Caballo sat a little apart, beneath an ancient tree, silently watching everyone, his gaze distant yet peaceful. He once said that if he could, he wanted to die in this place, where he felt closest to the truth. I understood he wasn't talking about death, but about returning to nature, to the primal human before they lost themselves. In the firelight, his face was etched with wrinkles like a map of miles traveled. He wasn't a fugitive, but a seeker rediscovering the roots of life. In the days that followed, I left Copper Canyon with an aching body but a full heart. I carried with me the image of those who taught me lessons no textbook ever could. They showed me that pain is not something to avoid, but a door to walk through. That strength doesn't come from muscles, but from the belief that you can continue when everything else has stopped. That happiness isn't in a distant place, but in every breath, every footfall on the ground. I remembered Caballo's words on a frosty evening. Humans are born to run, not to escape, but to live. He spoke softly, but each word resonated like a heartbeat. I understood he wasn't just talking about running, but about a way of life. Running is a symbol of freedom, the body's most honest act. When we run, we cannot pretend. Body and mind merge, all facades fall away, and we return to our purest essence. After Caballo left, news of him would occasionally surface and then dissipate like smoke. Some said he still wandered among the canyons. Others said he had merged with Mother Earth. But for me, he never disappeared. He existed in everyone he touched, in every step of those who dared to live true to their souls. I returned to city life, with its glass buildings and car horns. But whenever I looked down at my shoes, I remembered the worn leather sandals of the Tarahumara. I realized that everything I learned wasn't about running fast or slow, but about understanding why I walk. And when I started running again, this time not for training, not for a challenge, but because I needed to feel alive, I felt my breath merge with the wind, my heart beating with the rhythm of the earth. And for a moment, I became part of the world Caballo believed in, a world where humans are born to run. I began to see clearly that everything I once believed about the human body was wrong. While modern doctors said my feet were weak, my joints aging, that specialized running shoes were the only salvation, the Tarahumara still ran hundreds of kilometers in thin leather sandals, without injury, without fear, without limits. What made them so different? I sought out researchers, and the answer astonished me. Humans evolved to run, not as a sport, but as a biological imperative. An anthropology professor showed me the structure of the human foot, large gluteus muscles, and a unique cooling system that no other species possesses. He said, "If you look long enough, you'll realize this body wasn't born to sit in chairs, but to move, to pursue something ahead. We are the only creatures that can run continuously for hours in the midday sun without dying from heat." When I heard that, I felt as if evolutionary history suddenly came alive in my blood. Every muscle fiber, every breath told the story of my ancestors. They once hunted antelopes in the desert with endurance, not weapons. They ran not for prizes, but for survival. I remembered the footsteps of the Tarahumara, each step so light, they seemed not to strike the earth but merely skim over it. They still carried within them what we have forgotten. Back in the city, I met countless people wearing knee braces, using canes, or having quit running due to injury. I began to ask myself, why do people get weaker the better their shoes are? A sports doctor said it was inevitable, that age causes the body to decline. But another scientist smirked, saying modern footwear was the killer of natural instinct. When humans started running on rubber instead of feeling the earth, they lost the dexterity and balance that millions of years of evolution had built. I met a man named Ted, who called himself Barefoot Ted. He spoke of discarding shoes as a liberation. Ted had suffered chronic injuries, tried every type of shoe, insert, and painkiller, but nothing worked. One day, he threw everything away, leaving only his bare feet. At first, blood oozed, then calluses formed, and after that, he ran as if he had never known pain. He laughed loudly as he told the story, as if he had just found something lost from childhood. For him, every stone, every blade of grass became a language. He said when his feet touched the earth, he heard the words of his ancestors. I looked at him, at his dusty feet, and felt ashamed. I had worn shoes more expensive than a Tarahumara's monthly salary, yet each step was a blow to the truth. What Ted did seemed crazy, but he proved that simplicity wasn't stupidity, but primal wisdom. He said, "The foot knows how to protect itself, just don't get in its way." I remembered the Tarahumara children running barefoot over rocks, laughing as if they had never known fear. In a place without technology, without anyone measuring heart rates or counting steps, they remained strong because they understood their bodies. In the days that followed, I began to try running without shoes. At first, it was a burning sensation. Then, freedom. I felt the ground, felt the slopes, the softness, the roughness, every detail that shoes had previously hidden. I began to realize that injuries didn't come from running, but from how we forced our bodies to do unnatural things. When we tried to overprotect, we weakened what was once our strength. The feet don't need walls, they need space. I met more scientists, those who proved that human heels were not designed to strike the ground hard, as modern shoes force us to do. They said the foot was designed to land on its midsection to absorb and disperse force. It was the thick cushioning that caused the small muscles in the foot to lose function. And when the body no longer knew how to adjust itself, it began to break. From there, everything fell apart. Knees, hips, back. I felt as if someone had just pulled back the curtain of deceit that covered a billion-dollar industry. I remembered the image of Caballo Blanco, still running throughout the canyons in his worn leather sandals. He never spoke of technique, only that when you run with joy, the body knows how to do what is right. Perhaps in a world full of theories, we have forgotten to listen to that simple instinct. I felt small amidst mountains of knowledge and the laughter of those who lived freely. A scientist once told me that when a child learns to walk, it does what the entire medical profession forgets. It feels. The child falls, gets up, adjusts itself. It needs no instruction, no shoes, no tools, it just needs the earth beneath its feet. But as we grow up, we teach it to fear pain, to fear mistakes. And so, we take away the first lesson humanity ever understood. Walking is the first step to freedom. Running is the instinct of life. When I heard those words, I suddenly understood that the Tarahumara were not exceptions. They were simply a mirror reflecting what all of us once had. They needed no research, no laboratories, because they were living proof. I began to feel that all modern inventions were just ways for humans to cure a disease they themselves created, the disease of forgetting instinct. One afternoon, I sat on a cliff overlooking the canyon, where the Tarahumara still ran. The wind carried the scent of earth and the laughter of children. I took off my shoes, placed my feet on the ground, and in that moment, I felt something no scientist could describe. The earth was cold, but warmer than any pair of shoes. I closed my eyes and knew I was returning to my origins. Humans are born to run, not to prove strength, but to remember that they were once free. I left the city and returned to Copper Canyon as if pulled by an invisible force. Caballo was preparing what he called the Truth Run. No prizes, no media, no sponsors. Just people wanting to reclaim their souls by putting their feet on the ground. He wanted to gather the Tarahumara and the world's best ultrarunners onto one course to remind humanity that we are all born for this. News of the race spread like wildfire, and famous names began to appear. Scott, who had won almost every brutal ultramarathon on the planet, agreed to participate, not for glory but out of curiosity. Jen and Billy, two wild young people who ran for pure joy, also set out. Barefoot Ted, the eccentric who ran barefoot over hot gravel, said he couldn't miss it. As for me, I just wanted to see if it was truly possible to run without pain anymore. We journeyed south, crossing the Mexican border, entering a land where law existed only in whispers. The road to Copper Canyon had no signposts, only dust and fear. Drug gangs, bandits, police, everything was fluid. But Caballo said that as long as we kept our hearts pure, the Tarahumara would protect us. He said it with the calm of someone who had lived with danger for too long, as if faith could become a shield. Along the way, I thought about what I had learned about human origins. Scientists said that before bows and arrows, humans hunted by running, persistence hunting, they called it. A group of hunters would chase an antelope at midday. When the heat killed other creatures, the antelope was faster, but humans were more persistent. They would keep running, clinging on until it collapsed from exhaustion. That was not just a story of evolution, but an image of willpower. I understood that the Tarahumara, in their way of life, were still continuing that hunt, not to kill, but to live true to their heritage. Scott often said he never won by strength, but by perseverance. He recounted that the longest stretches were where one had to confront oneself when all muscles ached, when the will was about to break. That was when the soul spoke. Jen was different. She ran as if escaping something. She said at every starting line, she saw her entire inner world, love, fear, youth, and unerasable mistakes. Billy ran beside her, singing as he ran, as if using music to trick fatigue. And Barefoot Ted turned every stride into a philosophy. He said, "If the earth is mother, then our feet are the hands that touch her." I listened and felt that each person in the group carried their own reason, but deep down, they were all seeking the same thing, the connection between body, soul, and earth. When we reached the border of Copper Canyon, Caballo stood gazing into the distance. where the mountain ranges formed giant walls across the horizon. He said softly, "Inside there is where humans are truly tested." I saw a light in his eyes, the kind that only appears when someone is living fully what they believe. We began to descend deep into the valley, across slippery slopes, through rocky crevices where a single misstep meant falling into a bottomless chasm. The Tarahumara appeared along the way, silent, friendly, and smiling like those who knew all the world's secrets. Caballo introduced each person, then vanished for several days as if he had entered the mountains themselves. When he returned, he was leaner, darker, but his eyes glowed. He said everything was ready, the Tarahumara would participate, but not for money or fame, but because they respected the spirit of the race, the spirit of joy, equality, and courage. He said, "We will run together, no one wins, no one loses, only the joy of truly living." That was the philosophy of the Tarahumara and the core of humanity we have lost. In the days leading up to the race, we trained on old trails under the scorching sun. Scott taught Jen how to control her breathing, Jen taught barefoot Ted how to cup water in his hands, and Caballo observed from a distance. He never coached anyone, he just said, "Listen to your body." In the evenings, we sat around the fire, eating roasted corn and talking about why we ran. No one had the same answer, but in the silence, everyone understood. I began to realize something strange. When people ran together, they were no longer strangers. In the sweat and breath, in the pain in their calves, the divisions between people melted away. There was no nationality, no past, only the present moment, each heartbeat, each breath merging into the air. I understood why Caballo believed this race was not just a physical challenge, but a healing ritual. The night before the start, Caballo told a story about the oldest living Tarahumara elder in the region. The elder said humans once knew how to talk to the wind, but then they forgot. Because they stopped running, the old man said. I listened in silence. Perhaps that is what made us lose ourselves. Not technology, not cities, but because we forgot how to move as part of the earth. Before dawn, I went outside. I took a deep breath, the cold air lingering on my skin like an ancient memory. I thought of my ancestors, of the persistence hunters, the Tarahumara, and saw that even if the world changed, one thing remained constant. We are born to keep moving forward, no matter how tired, how afraid, or how uncertain the destination. As the sun just crested the mountain peaks, the Copper Canyon Valley seemed to awaken. The biting cold air permeated my skin, and steam rose from the thin river like smoke. We were there, in what people called the land of running spirits. Caballo Blanco appeared from the distance, his gaunt frame covered in a bright layer of dust. He smiled and said softly, "Today, everyone will remember what our ancestors once knew." No one replied, but in everyone's eyes there was a strange emotion, half eager, half sacred. We began our descent deeper into the valley, where the Tarahumara lived isolated from the world. Red earth houses were scattered among rocks and cacti. Children ran barefoot down the slopes, laughing as if they never knew fatigue. Women carried corn in baskets. Men carved wood into sandals. They looked at us without curiosity, without fear, only gently, as if accustomed to seeing strangers wander in and then disappear again. They lived outside the concept of time, knowing only the rhythm of the sun and the pulse of their hearts. Caballo led us to his small house on the mountainside. He called it home, though it had no door, just a few wooden planks and a stone hearth. He said he needed no walls because the mountains were already his roof. When night fell, we sat around the fire, listening to crickets mingle with the distant murmur of the river. Caballo recounted that years ago, he had lived in New Mexico, had a car, a house, a job. Then one day, he realized he had died within that very life. He left, walking until his feet brought him here. He said, "Here, I learned to breathe again, to live again, to run again." I looked at him and realized he wasn't running from the world. He was simply returning to it in a way humanity had forgot. The next day, we met Ano and other Tarahumara from across the canyons. They carried leather sandals, colorful shirts, and a few bags of roasted corn. No one asked about rules, no one discussed the distance. For them, the race was a part of life. Scott whispered to me that he had never seen such serenity before such a huge challenge. Jen and Billy sat drawing symbols in the sand. Barefoot Ted laughed loudly like a child, while Caballo silently gazed into the distance, where the mountains connected like fossilized waves. The night before the run, Caballo said this race wasn't just a physical test. It was a way for people to ask themselves, who are we truly when there's no technology, no shoes, no fame? He said running was the only way to be honest. When you run, you cannot pretend to be strong, you cannot lie to your body. Every step is truth. Those words echoed in the darkness, mingling with the wind like a prayer from those about to face something sacred. In the morning, everyone gathered on the trail between the mountains. There was no starting line, no counter, just Caballo standing amidst the crowd, raising his hand and then lowering it. The race began in silence. The sound of huaraches, bare feet, and breathing merged with the wind. I saw Scott and Anno run side by side, not competing, just maintaining a perfect rhythm together. Jen laughed loudly, her hair flying wild. And barefoot Ted ran, shouting philosophical yet joyful nonsense. I ran behind, feeling the dust cling to my face, feeling my heart beat fully with every stride. The trail led us high, then plunged into narrow valleys. The sun poured fire onto the rocks, and each breath felt like a small knife. But the Tarahumara remained light as the wind. They chatted as they ran, laughed when they conquered a steep climb, stopped to share water, and then continued. I realized they didn't see the race as a challenge, but as joy, a form of communication. There, no one hated, no one sought to prove anything. Everyone just ran because that was what they were born to do. By midday, the heat was baking dry. I saw barefoot Ted with blisters. Scott's back was drenched in sweat. Jen slipped on the gravel. Caballo ran ahead like a guiding spirit. He said nothing, but his every gesture seemed to remind us, don't fight the path, let it lead the way. I heard my footsteps merge with hundreds of others, and it felt as if we were no longer separate individuals. As the sun began to set, Anno overtook Scott, his face glowing in the twilight. Scott watched him, then smiled. I knew that was the moment he understood that winning or losing no longer mattered. The race ended as the last runners reached the village. Amidst the cheers of children and the smell of roasting corn, the Tarahumara began to dance and sing, then drank corn beer until the sky was full of stars. No one remembered who finished first, and no one asked who won. They only knew that on that day, they had all lived fully together. Caballo sat apart by the fire, his face shadowed but bright. He said nothing, just gazed towards the mountains, where moonlight fell like silver threads. I approached him and offered him water. He nodded faintly and said, "See, this is what it means to be human." In that moment, I understood that all the theories, technologies, and layers of civilization we built could not compare to this simple truth: a group of people amidst nature, sharing breath, feeling life together. As the night waned, I looked up at the sky and felt reborn. I understood why Caballo called it the truth run. Not for fame, not for money, not for achievement, but because when you run, you can hide nothing. Running is the purest act a human can perform, where soul and body become one. And in the soft moonlight, as the Tarahumara still danced, I knew that what they preserved was not the strength of their legs, but the freedom of their spirit, something the rest of the world had forgotten. The path leading to Eureka appeared like a long crack in the rock, deep and eerily silent. We passed through giant mountain ranges, steep ravines where one misstep would send you plunging into a bottomless void. Caballo led the way, his worn hat shading half his sun-baked face. He moved lightly, as if he knew every stone, every breath of wind in this land. The journey to Eureka was not just a movement through space, but an entry into another world, a world of endurance, nature, and faith. We arrived as the sun set. The small village nestled in the heart of the canyon, its brown-yellow adobe houses covered in dust. Oil lamps flickered in doorways. Dogs barked, children laughed, and the scent of roasting corn wafted on the wind. Eureka was both wild and familiar, like a place where humans had lived for thousands of years unchanged. The villagers looked at us without surprise, without fear, only nodding gently, as if greeting people who had traveled too far and finally returned. Caballo led us to a simple house on the hillside. He said this would be our resting place before the race began. From the window, I saw the entire valley spread out like a painting from an old dream. The silver river meandered through the village, rising and falling in the distance, and the shadows of Tarahumara people ran down the slopes like living arrows. They came to participate in the race, not with the tension of athletes, but with the serenity of people about to take a stroll. As night fell, Caballo built a fire and sat in our small circle. He didn't speak much, just gazed into the distance. Scott sat opposite, his eyes deep and quiet, his hands clasping a cup of water. He had won dozens of ultramarathons, but here, in this land, he was like someone just learning to run. Jen and Billy sat together, laughing, but I saw something else in their eyes, fear mingled with excitement. And Barefoot Ted enthusiastically expounded on his philosophy of barefoot running, like a missionary speaking of primal faith. Caballo remained silent until the fire was almost out. He then spoke softly, his voice hoarse but clear. "Tomorrow, don't think about winning or losing. Run like a child. Be joyful, for joy is the only thing that will help us reach the end of the path." I looked at him and realized that gaze was not that of a commander, but of someone passing on his legacy. None of us knew that would be the last time he articulated the philosophy of his own life. Live and run as if every step is a gift. Early the next morning, we joined the Tarahumara in the village square. There were no flags, no organizers, no spectators. Just Caballo standing amidst the crowd, raising his hand and then lowering it as a signal to start. The race began in silence. The sound of huaraches, bare feet, and breathing merged with the morning mist. The race began not with ambition, but with the silence of the earth and the breath of humanity. The course wound around the mountainside, cut through rivers, and passed through thorny forests. Scott and Anno ran side by side, not competing, but harmonizing in a perfect rhythm. Watching them, I felt as if I was witnessing two eras colliding. Anno didn't look at a watch or consume energy gels, he simply ate roasted corn and drank spring water. Scott, once sponsored by the biggest sports brands, now discarded all tactics. Only his body and will remained. Jen and Billy ran behind, laughing and singing. They stopped mid-course to share water with a younger Tarahumara girl, then continued together. Barefoot Ted turned every bend into a small festival, running and shouting nonsensical but joyful phrases. I ran slower, quietly observing, and felt as if I was in the midst of an ancient ritual, where humans became one with the universe. By midday, the sun beat down like fire, the ground was scorching, the air dry and hot, blurring every image ahead. I saw Scott slow down, sweat dripping from his shoulders, while Anno maintained a steady pace, his breath light like someone meditating. I suddenly understood that true strength doesn't come from muscles, but from a mind that knows how to accept everything. When Scott pushed past his limit, he looked up at Anno and smiled a smile not of surrender, but of respect. As the afternoon waned, sunlight slanted across the cliffs, painting the valley in brilliant gold. Anno crossed the finish line first, to the applause and cheers not of spectators, but of friends. Scott arrived a few minutes later, but there was no failure here. He and Anno embraced in the dusty courtyard, sweat, dirt, and laughter mingling as one. Jen, Billy, and Ted gradually appeared, each exhausted but with eyes shining brightly. Caballo walked over and patted them on the shoulder, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Both we and the Tarahumara understood that this race had no winners, only people who had found themselves. As night fell, the village of Eureka glowed with firelight. Jen laughed loudly, Ted played a guitar. Scott shared corn with the children. Everyone drank corn beer, told stories, and Caballo, in a dark corner, sat watching, his gaze distant but gentle, as if he had seen something beyond human comprehension. I approached him and asked if he was happy. He just smiled and said softly, "I am happy because everyone ran as they were born to run." In that moment, I knew he had accomplished what he lived for. The next morning, the first sunlight illuminated the mountainside, spread across the dark adobe roofs, reflecting on the winding river. No one spoke of the race anymore. The Tarahumara returned to their familiar rhythm of life, running through the village, grinding corn, cooking soup, laughing softly as if yesterday had been just a dream. Scott helped them carry water. Jen and Billy sat with the children, while Barefoot Ted still philosophized about bare feet, making everyone laugh. I saw Caballo walking alone along the riverbank, his hand skimming the water as if saying goodbye. After the race, what remained was not victory, but stillness and gratitude. In the afternoon, Caballo held a small ceremony, without ritual or speeches. He brought out cloth bags filled with corn, dried apples, and a few pairs of sandals, then distributed them one by one to everyone: Anno, Scott, Jen, Billy, Ted. Everyone received the same portion. He said these were not rewards, but keepsakes, to remind everyone of what they had shared. This equality came not from theory, but from the heart, because in Caballo's world, no one stood above anyone else. That evening, we shared our last meal together. The fire burned brightly in the valley, casting its light on radiant faces. The Tarahumara sang ancient melodies whose words no one understood, yet everyone felt them touch the deepest part of their souls. Scott said he had never witnessed such pure joy. Jen said she wanted to leave everything behind and live there. Barefoot Ted laughed loudly again, saying he had found his own religion. Caballo remained silent, his eyes gazing into the fire as if reflecting on his own life. As the night faded, he began to speak. His voice was steady, deep, and sincere, without a hint of self-pity. He said he was once a boxer, living in a noisy world where strength was measured by fists and money. Then one day, he realized all those victories were meaningless without freedom. He abandoned everything, wandered through deserts, slept under the stars, and eventually found the Tarahumara. Here, he no longer had to prove anything. They didn't ask where he came from, didn't care who he used to be. They only taught him how to listen, how to run, and how to smile. He recounted that it was in this very poverty that he saw life's greatest wealth, to live truly without fear. We sat in silence, listening to the wind sighing through the cliffs. Caballo said he organized the race not to create legends, but to remind everyone that joy doesn't need to be sought far away. It's right there in your breath, in your heartbeat, in every step. He looked up and smiled at me. When you run, you'll see a miracle happen. You stop thinking about yourself and just feel like you're part of the flow. Then you can't be afraid. I looked at him and saw a face both weary and radiant, as if he was glowing from within. The next day, as the sun rose, we parted ways with the Tarahumara. They waved, their smiles gentle, their eyes as deep as the earth. Scott, Jen, Billy, and Ted set off to return to their own worlds, but before I left, I went back to find Caballo. He wasn't there. Someone in the village said he had gone towards the mountains, to a place no one knew what lay behind. I looked in that direction, seeing the small rocky path leading into the mist. I understood he never intended to stay, because the place he belonged was constant movement. He was born to run, not to stop. Years later, I heard news that Caballo had passed away. They found him in a canyon crevice, near a dry stream, with no signs of violence, just his slender body, his head resting on his arm, his face peaceful as if asleep. To outsiders, it was a lonely death, but to me, it was a homecoming. He had lived exactly as he always said, a life unbound, unfearful, with only love for the path and for people. I remembered that evening in Copper Canyon when he looked up at the sky and said, "If one day I disappear, don't pity me. Run, laugh, for I will still be there in every breeze, in every step you take." When I heard the news, I didn't cry. I simply put on my shoes and went out to run. The road was long, the wind strong, my heart pounded, but amidst my breath, I felt him there. Every sound of my shoes hitting the ground was like his echoing whisper. Remember, humans are born to move, to love, and to be free. Now, whenever I see someone running in the street, I no longer think of sport or training. I think of Caballo, of the Tarahumara, of that audience-less race in that distant place. I understand that we don't need to be fast, just honest with every step, because running is not about escaping life, but about feeling it more deeply. And when someone asks me why I still run, I just smile, because it's how I continue the unfinished conversation with Caballo Blanco, who taught the world that freedom is not found where you arrive, but in how you move. I still remember the morning after his passing. When the news reached those who had run with him, no one spoke. Scott silently hung his old huaraches on the wall. Jen sent me a short note. He lived as he believed. Barefoot Ted said he would continue to organize the race every year, because it was the only way to keep Caballo's spirit moving among the mountains. He left no legacy but his spirit, but that very spirit made people feel closer and more authentic. Later, I returned to Mexico, to Eureka once more. The trail was still there. The mountains still stood majestic, and the Tarahumara children still ran along the riverbank with joyful laughter. I met Ano, who still wore his old leather sandals. He said Caballo wasn't dead. He had just run further away, to a place without suffering, without time. I understood that for them, death was not an end, but the next stage of the journey. And in that moment, I felt relieved. Perhaps all Caballo ever taught was one simple phrase: keep going. I followed the path he once led us on, over dry grass, through mountain passes, through narrow crevices that only he knew how to cross. Each step was like a memory. I heard his laughter echo in the wind, saw his figure fade into the distance, his silver hair shining in the sunlight. He was still running, neither fast nor slow, just running as if the whole world moved with him. I realized that people like Caballo don't truly disappear. They dissolve into the movement of the earth and wind, becoming the heartbeat of the world. Years later, the barefoot running movement spread everywhere. people began to abandon their shoes, seeking to rediscover a natural way of touching the earth. They spoke of the Tarahumara, of Caballo, of the born to run philosophy. But I knew that for him, it was never a trend. It was a way of life, a silent prayer dedicated to human freedom. I was happy to know that his strides had awakened in millions the desire to truly live, even if only for a fleeting moment when their feet touched the ground. I still run. Though older, every morning while the city sleeps, I go out into the street. I listen to the wind. I listen to my heartbeat, to my breath. I set no goals, count no distances. I just run until I feel my body disappear, leaving only breath and heartbeat merging together. And in that moment, I see Caballo's indistinct figure, just a feeling that someone is running beside me, smiling. I understand he is not in memory, but in the very moment I am living. Sometimes people ask me what makes the Tarahumara so happy. I reply that they don't seek happiness, they just live authentically. They don't run to win, but to thank life for existing. They don't separate labor, joy, and religion, everything is one. When they run, they sing. When they're tired, they laugh. When they're in pain, they still continue because for them, living is running and running is living. That is what Caballo saw, and it is what the modern world is losing. I remember his last words: running doesn't teach us how to flee from fear, but how to face it with every step. Whenever I face difficult days, I remember that phrase. When I'm tired, I run. When I'm confused, I run. When I'm lost, I still run, not to forget, but to remember. To remember that I am alive, that every step is a thank you to the earth and sky. And then there are mornings when I see children in the park, laughing, running, and playing without reason. I see in them the image of the Tarahumara, free, carefree, and authentic. I think of Caballo, Anno, Scott, Jen, Billy, and all those who have set foot on that path. We have walked different roads, but we all learned one thing. True joy is not found at the destination, but in the journey itself. Now when someone asks me what born to run means, I don't speak of science, physiology, or technique. I say it means born to live. Because when we run, we are nobody else but ourselves, naked, authentic, and free. I know I will never reach where Caballo is, but every time my foot touches the ground, I feel a little closer. As the sun sets, I often stand watching the long roads disappear into twilight, thinking of him, of Copper Canyon, of the Tarahumara. I hear the wind running past my ear, and in that wind, I imagine I hear his voice saying, "Keep going, for we are born not to stop, but to go on forever." And so I run again, to remind the world that amidst all the noise, there is still a simple truth that never fades. Humans are born to run, to love, and to live as if they are part of the wind. Perhaps the greatest legacy of that journey is not an answer to how to run faster, but a mirror reflecting how far humanity has strayed from its true nature. One day, amidst the rhythm of modern life, we suddenly realize that all progress becomes insignificant if we forget how to listen to our bodies, forget the true sensation of a foot touching the earth. The book isn't about sports, but about freedom. It points out that the deepest joy comes from the simplest things: breath, wind, and the feeling of living fully. When we run, we are not running from anyone, but running towards ourselves, the primal, enduring, and pure part of us that has been buried by fear, habit, and the world's noise. Perhaps true happiness is not about achieving something, but about still being able to feel your heart beat strongly for something you love. Born to Run doesn't advise us to discard shoes or abandon the city, but reminds us that we can still find freedom right in everyday life if we dare to slow down, dare to listen to the very quiet call from within. And if there is one thing to carry after closing the book, it is this question. When life makes you weary, what will you do? Sit down and complain, or stand up and keep running? Not to reach the finish line, but to keep your soul in motion.